give a few more minutes for folks to be coming in. All right. Oh, I love the song. All right. Getting our praise on before the class. All right.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Howdy, everyone.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Hola.
¿Cómo está?
Hello.
Howdy. Sorry, I'm waiting for Eastside to get back from school, and then we have to get in the car again.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I figured this time of day. Yeah. Now the school's back in.
Yeah, he's usually here by now, but I guess it's a lot of traffic.
Okay. All righty. Well, it's we'll work with what we have. So today I wanted to switch it up a little bit today and focus on prayer and give that space for our discussion. And I'm thinking about doing this over the course of more than one session. We've covered quite a few Orisha over the several months we've been having this class. And I've just been inspired to pivot and talk about some larger questions, because I've noticed that some of our communication and our discussion have been around some larger questions. And so I wanted to kind of pivot and let those larger questions kind of be at the center of our discussion, and we'll weave in different things. It always is on a timer, and I don't remember putting it on a timer. We'll weave in certain other, we'll weave in certain issues or Orisha, related or pertaining to Orisha inner alignment within the larger things. I'm thinking about doing, you know, a series on prayer, a series on sacrifice, that type of stuff. Just to give some larger context to our practice, because something I've been thinking about and something one of my elders inspired me to remember is that even if we know a lot about the Orisha specifically, there are fundamental questions and things that make this religion what it is, right? As I've said to some of you, um, I've been in this tradition for a while, and I've been in different branches of the tradition for a while. And there's a thread through all of it. Whether you're a Candomblé, Vodun, Lukumi, Isheshe, um, whether you're quote unquote Ifa centric and you focus more on working with a Babalawo or Isheshe or working more with Olorishas and the ATR tradition or Lukumi, which can be either Babalawo centric or Olorisha centric, depending on the Ile you're with. Regardless of wherever you land in practice, there are certain threads that give you a sense of something, a current that runs underneath all of it that can be recognized as the energy you're working with. So some people like to say, you know, Oshun is Oshun, Shango is Shango, you know, Yemanja is Yemanja. You know, we can split them up to dress them up to look the way we see them mirrored in our practice, whether we wear gingham and gingham and lukumi for blue and white for Yemanja, or we wear the bayanas in Brazil for Yemanja in blue and white, or we dress in indigo in Nigeria. Yemanja is Yemanja, right? You can dress it up on the outside, quote unquote, to be a representation of what you think that Orisha should be or look like or feel connected to your energy of worship. But underneath it all, if you go to Ibadan and you're a Lukumi priest, if you encounter Yemanja, you should recognize her. She's not going to be a whole different Orisha when you get to Ibadan, right? So it's these types of, larger questions that, and I can tell you, even in this tradition, I've encountered that there, even within, the whole question around, who should practice and who shouldn't. Should white people practice? Should they not practice? Should this be only a Black tradition? Can white people mount Orisha? Can they not? Just even those questions about representation and look and feel. Those questions oftentimes are born out of a lot of issues around oppression, but they do manifest in how we understand and gatekeep the practice. But when I tell you that I have experienced the energy of Yemanja in people from all walks of life, okay, including this drum recently at our Ile, where there was a white male priest who happened to mount her, and it was a true mount. It was true. I know personally because I served her. She asked me to serve her. So I thought about thinking about that experience, thinking about some questions and discussions I've had with my elders. I thought, I'm going to back up from the focus only on the Orisha specifically and getting into, those discussions and think about more bigger questions and give everyone a chance to kind of share your experiences with these bigger questions and experiences and reflections on these bigger questions. So with that, I'm gonna focus pretty broadly today. And I'm thinking even with this broad focus, I don't think it's going to be a thing we can run through really quickly, because I think, some of you will be seeing some of these things for the first time. Some of you will be seeing them again, but not really having a direct opportunity to engage it, at any in-depth level in terms of the prayers we're going to go over. And then there are some larger questions that can also be explored even within the prayers themselves. So I want to focus on 3 prayer tools for this whole series. And so one is the Mofari Ballet. So I'm calling that a prayer tool. So does anybody, I have a definition of it here, but what has your experience been with Mofari Ballet? I describe it as to put the head to the ground, which is literally what it means in Yoruba, right? Some of you have had experiences with Mofari Ballet. So I want to give you all a chance to talk about what your experiences have been with that. And then we can, have more discussion about it and back and forth with it. Is that too broad for you guys to think about?
Yeah, yeah. What specifically would you want us to talk about with the practice?
Well, Mofari Ballet is putting your head to the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Fatumbi says he's gonna type because he's at work. So Mofari Ballet is literally when you put your head to the ground. And if you're in this practice and you're actually beyond just getting readings and beyond just getting services beyond, for readings, like if you need a prescription for out of the reading and said you had to make an ebo, right? That's one thing, right? But if you're actually engaging in the practice, say you're going to move forward in the practice and you're going to receive an Orisha, or you're going to receive the Bori ceremony, or you're going to go through something else where you're going through a process that's ritualistic, that's going to advance your experience in the practice beyond just receiving a service from the Orisha or for your ancestors. At some point during that process, there's going to be a Mofari Ballet. At some point, in order to advance in achieving inner alignment with Orisha, you have to put your head to the ground. There is no way around it. Everything that we do, if everything we do, like say we have if we have a shrine in our home, whether it be a shrine for Olokun, or a shrine for our Ori, or in the case of my goddaughter, who I have to say congratulations to, Antronika, actually. Let me stop for a second and say congratulations to Antronika for receiving her hand of Ifa. Very much
congratulations.
So she
Congrats. Thank you.
Yay.
Yeah, it's a beautiful ceremony. I was very happy to be there and to support her through that. It was a beautiful ceremony. So if she wants to share what she can share about that in terms of her process with that Mofari Ballet, she can. So at some point, so if someone comes to my shrine and they say, or if it comes up with someone's going to receive Olekes, right? Or someone's going to receive the beads for Oshun, Yemanja, Obatala, and Shango. One of the first acts that person has to do to begin that process is Mofari Ballet. Yes? Yes. So there's that. So we take that for granted, right? And, so it's something that we do. I do it every morning. I pray every morning to my Orisha. So I say, I do that for my Ori. I pray to my Ori, and I do Mofari Ballet to my Ori. I Mofari Ballet to Oshun. I Mofari Ballet to Yemanja, Obatala in particular. And Alekba, I salute Alekba, right? So, okay, I'm gonna speak on what Fatumbi is saying. So, so that is an act that implies a lot of things, right? When we put our heads to the ground, it implies a lot of what the relationship is. When we do that act, what are we saying about ourselves in relationship to something or someone else? When we do the act of putting our head to the floor, and there are many cultures that have that as an act of submission, right? We know clearly, probably the first encounter many of us have with that is when we understand or encounter the Muslim faith, right? One of the first things we've seen, either through some demonstration that we've seen or through something in popular culture that we've seen, that is that the act of submission and putting one's head down to the floor is something we have seen in that tradition. It is very much a part of our tradition, no matter what, and this is one of those threads, right? No matter whether you're Isheshe, whether you're Ifa-centric, meaning, work with the Babalawo, whether you are Lukumi, or you work with a Babalawo and Lukumi, or you work with an Orisha and Lukumi, or Oluwo, which is somebody who has both. Whether you work with any of those, no matter where you work, Bodun, Dogon, you name it. You could go across the Western, Fa in Togo, in Ghana. No matter what, you're going to at some point, you're going to put your head to the ground. It is going to happen, right? So there's something about that act that is transient, across practices. And I want to hear from some of you in terms of your experiences with it. So I want to start with Fatumi's comment. It's a really humbling experience. It reminds me that something else has come before me and something will come after, and I'm just a link in the chain. I agree. I feel the same way. And Dre's mentioned it's interesting to me. It's interesting for me, someone who grew up as a Catholic and would kneel in church during parts of service during prayer, right? Exactly. There are in churches, thank you for bringing that up. There are in churches, if you go to a church, you will see as part, it feels far different than kneeling, right? So when you go to a Catholic church or some Episcopalian branches of churches, there's a bench, right? Even whether you're in the pew or you're at the altar, there's a bench where that folds down. For those of you who may not be familiar, because I come from those traditions too. So that boat folds down, and so you can put your knees, and it's like a little bench with a little felt, or sometimes it has a little red pillow where you can literally put your knees on the bench while you're in service and praying at the pew or at the altar. And so so you're kneeling in prayer, which is different from putting your head to the ground, right? It's different, but the idea is supplication. The idea is that you're literally putting yourself in a place of submission or acknowledging something higher than yourself, is as Fatumi talked about. And so you're literally, and when I do that, I feel like I'm putting myself in a position of remembering that I'm not the one in charge. That's what comes up for me. That I recognize that even though I have agency in my own life, I have capacity to make decisions for myself. I have free will, I have consciousness, but I also recognize that part of my consciousness comes from connection to a higher source. Part of my capacity to make decisions and to act with agency comes from a higher source. It comes from a source that I work with so that I can have a different, so that I can have that as part of my process. So that's what comes up for me. Roz, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks, Dress, for bringing up the kneeling thing. I grew up Catholic, and it's interesting. I never even thought about it being an act of supplication because you do it every 2 minutes. So I just never thought about what it was signifying because you're doing it all the time. But when you place your head on the mat, that is a whole other level, not only because you are literally lowering yourself because there's this higher power that you're honoring, but I always feel, and I don't know if it's because of the mat, I always feel like I feel the energy going right through my head when I do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thing to bring up. I'm sorry if you guys couldn't see yourself. I'm putting you where you can see yourself. That is an interesting thing to bring up. I think for me, I would call that the current.
Mm.
It's like a current when I experience it. So when you put your head to the mat, you're not focusing. I also, in relationship to what you just said, one thing also I would also say is that I recognize I'm not focusing so much on myself. Even though I am praying, with myself and my consciousness as part of the process, right? I pray for myself. Oftentimes, if you guys notice in the prayers that we used to do on Saturdays, I pray for myself kind of last. I pray and consider, I go kind of funnel my prayer to the point where I'm kind of close to last, right? So I'm reminded that that I'm not the sole focus of my own attention to myself. So, and that's what the current reminds me of. It reminds me that I'm not the only one present, and I'm not the only one that should be paid attention to. So I begin my day reminding myself that my focus and attention is not on just what I want to do or who I am or what I am, but what and who and where Oshun is, who and what and where my Ori is, which is a part of me, but also a part of my God consciousness too, right? It's my connection to the Most High, right? So it's interesting. So that current is really a real thing. It's a thing that keeps you connected to that, and that's why prayer is so important, because I think it helps to keep that connection with that current very active, right? It can. It has the capacity to do that. And so putting the head on the ground means that you're literally connecting with that energy and that source and that current that can be found through that act of putting one's head to the ground or putting one's head to the ground and or praying. Right. So so that's a very good point you mentioned, Roz. I appreciate that. So what has been some of other folks' experiences with that act?
For me, it the physical aspect of it, it's like when a transformer kind of comes together. Like, because like all of my body parts have to like be in one flow to be able to, and then surrendering my thoughts before I came in, or if I had like a crick in my shoulder, that just submitting all of that and pushing that all to the side, and giving myself to that moment is something that I feel the times that I've done it, especially because when you're outside of doing this practice and you're just in everyday life, it's just like, oh, I got to do this. Oh, I got to do that. Like you're just ripping, running, not even thinking about anything. But when I do that, I'm reminded of my body and how it all has to come together to be in this moment. So that's the feeling that I usually get, and then I feel kind of like brought back together once I go through the whole process and go on with the ceremony. So I get
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And for I've teased my older godchildren, but there is something about that that's real about putting aside, trying as best you can to put to the side and not let the center of your experience in prayer when you're in that mode of having your head to the floor, having it be like, ooh, dang, I gotta pop my knee. Ooh, I gotta, ooh, all that fun stuff. You make a really good point there. Putting that to the side to literally put, like I say, not putting ourselves first, putting that energy in the presence of that energy that's before us first, and doing that in a way that's as honest as we can be with ourselves. That's sometimes not easy to do, but it's actually, I think, a good effort. A good effort towards that is an important thing to do, to definitely focus on. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, but I appreciate you all's input and sharing what your feelings are about that. So I want, as part of inner alignment, clearly prayer is part of it, right? So thinking about the fact that we are in an act that is connected to the process. When we actually do engage in Mofodi Ballet, I think is having a consciousness in that moment, that you're literally putting your head, your God consciousness, and putting it down in order to acknowledge a higher consciousness, literally, that's supporting you in your journey. I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. And so I encourage all of you to remember that. And it happens when we're either at the shrine, and it also happens when saluting elders, right? And I'd like to also, for those of you who don't know, because when you go through certain rituals where you advance in the tradition, you have to salute your elders, right? Some of you have experienced that, right? You have to salute your godparent, you have to salute your ajubona, you have to salute your second godparent, you have to salute your any of your god siblings that are older than you, and if you're not initiated, then it's pretty much any priest in the room, even if they're a year old, in terms of their initiation year. So when that Mofodi Ballet is happening, when you Mofodi Ballet, when you put your head to the ground for a priest, it's the same process, because that priest is carrying the ashe of that Orisha on their head. So you're literally you're supplicating not to that person as a human being, but to the Orisha that they carry with them as part of their consciousness. So when you do that, when you're introduced to an elder and you're told this is your elder brother Baba D, he's the eldest Orisha in the house. That means that for 30, how many? And he just had his Ocha birthday yesterday, actually, and I think he's 34. No, wait, no, he can't be 34. He's 20. Okay, so he has 34 years. She'll be 35 in October. So he's 31 years of having been made a priest in this tradition. 31 years. So you're literally saluting 31 years of his relationship with Yemanjab, and Yemanjab being with him for 35 years in his life. And when you salute him, so you're saluting Yemanjab. He just happens to be one of her earthly representatives. That's what we become. We become in a way, their earthly representatives. So Mofodi Ballet to elders is a way to acknowledge the Orisha too. You're as well as the person. And if so sometimes we say, however you feel about the person, you don't want to miss your blessing from the Orisha and not salute them, right? Because there may be elders that you may encounter, and you're like, I don't know about that person, but if they're an elder and they're in the room, we say to put those things aside, unless if that person has been harmful or dishonored that Orisha in some way that is harmful to the community. I don't put my head to those people, just to tell you where I am. Generally, I don't, unless it's a real serious reason why I have to. But if that person has committed harm in a way that's really difficult and has not made reparations for that harm, that's where I draw my line. I'm pretty consistent about that. But if that person is a respectable elder and that person carries that ashe or that Orisha on their head, and they're older than me, even if they're a month older than me. There are some people, because of when I was my Orisha month and year, there are times when I'll say, oh, I'm 19 years made to Oshun. Oh, I'm 19 years too. And so then we look at each other like, oh, okay, when were you born? Oh, I was born in April. Oh, well, I was born in July. So I salute them, even if they're 3 months older than me. So, so that happens quite a bit for me now, especially now that I'm much older in the tradition. So it really can get that to that level of minutia for people who are in the tradition. So the Mojuba. So that's something that, oh, okay. All right. Hey, Sai. Yeah, so the Mojuba is the prayer you all hear me say. And it's mostly 90+% unchanged most of the time when I say it. I may add different things because of my knowledge of prayer and the use of words in prayer. But generally, it's the same. And so I have that to share tonight to talk about, so that we can talk about this being one of the fundamental prayers that's introduced in our tradition. And if once one receives their alekes, one can start to learn this prayer. And if you have Orisha in your home, you can use this prayer to speak with your Orisha. You don't have to be initiated to use the Mojuba. You do not have to have that right, but having Orisha in your home is a gateway for sure to using this prayer and practicing this prayer. So for those who are on the path to initiation, having knowledge of this prayer can be very helpful once one is initiated. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys the Mojuba. Okay, I think I'm gonna move this so that you guys can see all of it. Can everyone see the whole screen? You can do a thumbs up or a hand up, or a thumbs up or say yes, or chat. Everyone can see? Okay. So the Mojuba, as I've mentioned, is like a very fundamental prayer. It's a prayer of invocation. It's a prayer that helps to honor. It's like the Mofori Ballet in in prayer, in actual words, right? So you put your head to the floor, but then you also have this as kind of like a way to verbally do so, right? It's a way to acknowledge our place in the universe, and it's also a more broad way of honoring what we would consider in many ways the order of the universe. What encompasses it and what is encompassed by it. So this is the overall. Of course, it can get very granular because you can include prayers to the Orisha, you can include prayers to the ancestors, you can include prayers to your spiritual ancestors, whether they by blood or by stone. And by stone meaning once you receive your alekes, you inherit a lineage that's connected to this prayer. And once you receive, Orisha, you receive a lineage that's connected to this prayer. So we're going to go over the general prayer. And like I said, you can the ways it can be expanded is through either knowledge of your lineage and incorporating that into your lineage, into your prayer, or acknowledgement of your Orisha. So before we say the Mojuba, we say the libation first, which you guys, some of you have practiced already. And the libation is Omi Tutu, Ona Tutu, Ile Tutu, Ashe Tutu, Tutu Ladoye, Tutu Ariku Babawa. So that precedes your Mojuba. But then you go into speaking your Mojuba after that. So the first part of the Mojuba speaks of 3 ways we refer to God. And so for us, I've explained this before too, but when we're speaking of God, we're speaking of God as the ultimate source of sources. God is the source of sources. God is not a male energy. God is not a purely female energy. God is not good. God is not bad. God is not, God does not choose sides for us in our tradition. That's one fundamental difference between, I think, our acknowledgement of God in Christianity, is that God, through this understanding of tradition, is the container of literally all possibilities. Whether those possibilities be related to Ajogun, which are the negative forces in the world, disease, illness, fighting, war, arguments, problems related to worldly problems, daily problems, loss, tragedy, sudden tragedy. I can name others. Problems related to money, problems related to punishment, which is add-on, I think that's add-on is punishment. Any of the Ajogun that represent those things that keep us out of balance and keep us unhealthy in all ways. All of those things are also under God's dominion. So when we pray to God, we can pray to God for all of those things, to relate to all those things, because God has dominion over all of those things. So we acknowledge God first because of God's place in being the creative agent behind any and all things that have ever existed, ever at all. So that's why we have this, we begin with this, because to us, it's like, I've talked about the funneling before. It's in a way a part of that God is, of course, the biggest part of the funnel for us. Any questions about our references to God and what that means? It's pretty straightforward, right? I don't see any, I'll make sure I go through all the, okay. Kiara, a lot of this is very new for you. So if you have any questions that you have, wondering about out loud or to yourself, you can definitely chat with everyone or just ask because you probably have the don't have as much connection to some of this. So so please feel free to ask any questions, okay?
All right, thank you for that. I don't have anything that is on my brain right now, but I am learning a lot. I mean,
Okay.
definitely how God is portrayed and, honor that.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you for that feedback. So we go from that to the Mojuba, where we honor our mother and our father. And this is regardless of whether our mother and father are dead or alive. So we honor creation, and when we honor God, and then we honor our parents because they are inherent to our creation. And again, whether we, and this is not, if you just had arguing with your dad or your mom, or when your dad or your mom departed from this earth, if there was some tension that was unresolved that kept you at odds or kept you estranged from each other, if you didn't know your mother or your father, if there was some inherent conflict with your father or your mother that made you feel that you could not have them in your life, or something else, some other thing that would in some ways bring up some acknowledgement of a tension between you and one or both of your parents. None of that undermines the need to mojibah them. That still is a requirement in this prayer. It is, regardless. I was saying the mojibah, just to give you guys an idea, I was saying the mojibah to my father when I didn't know who my father was. And that is the honest truth. So when I had never met him, I had never spoken to him, I had never seen him, his face, and wasn't sure of his real name, I was still saying mojibah baba. Because the idea of this is to acknowledge that we come from two people physically who served a greater purpose, who fulfilled your destiny and my destiny through our birth. And that is always worth honoring, that they fulfilled their destiny to have us be present here on earth at this time, in this time and space. So that in itself is why we mojibah them, because if they had not fulfilled their destiny to have us, we would not have been able to fulfill our destiny to actually exist physically and to have our God consciousness exist. So that is why that is without doubt part of it. And all of the other concerns and questions that come up when we deal with our ideas of mother and fatherhood, and whether we can reckon with it, are kept in another place in our connection to it. But when it comes to prayer, the prayer that we say, we have to acknowledge them. Okay. Any questions or concerns about it? And also for people who have been adopted, I expand this, and I don't know if I've spoken to the people here who have had that experience, but I've expanded it and spoken to some people and let them know that you're acknowledging the two people who fulfilled their destiny to have you as a child in order for you to feel yours. But you're also acknowledging your adoptive family here too. And when we talk about Egun, I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I also think it's important for people who have had people who have literally served in that role in their lives to also feel that they can expand their understanding of that acknowledgement to those people as well, because even though they did not physically have you, they still actually fulfilled their destiny to make sure that you made it to adulthood. And they played an important and pivotal role in supporting you to getting to this point in your life where you had the experience that led you to even acknowledging and being aware of being able to mojibah. So I like to expand it to include adoptive parents as well, and adoptive family and lineage as well. Especially from people who are adopted from birth. It would be a shame, and I know some lineages have different, and I've actually consulted my elders on this because I felt this way, and I consulted my elders, and they actually confirmed that this is the way it should be, that people, particularly those who are adopted from a very young age of birth, definitely should consider in their consciousness their inclusion of the birth parents for sure, but also their adoptive parents, because those adoptive parents are pivotal to that person's development, growth, and capacity to evolve and develop as a human being. Okay. And I'll extend that. So we'll talk about Egun in a minute, but any questions about Mochi Ba Baba, Mochi Ba Ye Ye? Any questions about that?
I just wanted to share my appreciation of what you shared about the birth parents and adopted parents.
Oh, yeah.
As an adoptee in this tradition, it has really expanded my understanding and how to honor. And it has actually given me confidence to, when it comes to speaking to my biological family, when it comes to speaking to my family, how I see them now is less rigid than what I was reared into before I found my birth family. So that I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's right. I think we've done some work with your adoptive ancestors, right?
Yeah, with my mom.
Right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And she spoke.
Yeah.
She had a lot to say. So, right. So that's important. It's super important. And that's the thing about this religion, and I've said numerous times too, is that I think one of the reasons why this tradition, and I say this about Africanity generally, is the ability to be adaptable, over and all. In so many ways, we've experienced that adaptability. We have the music we have because we've been adapted. We've had jazz, blues. It's so incipient. It's so part of our DNA to be that way. And I think that idea of expansion, which is a big part of this tradition in terms of fundamental theoretical concept, the idea of expansion is applied and seen in so many ways that we actually are. We experience this tradition, and we experience the ability for the tradition to work for us. And I think that's why we're able to have that as part of the process too, Katie. Okay, Lynette is joining us. What's the difference between Iya and Yeye? That is a good question. That is a good question. So I'm going to take my stab at it, because you probably have as many different interpretations of this as there are people in the world who know and experience the difference. Because Iya represents, I can say for our lineage, Iya more represents the elder who is your mother, but spiritual mother, right? So Yeye oftentimes refers to the biological mother, and it's also referred to as a term of endearment for a mother. So Yeye is a way to speak of mother and motherhood, and a way to speak of a connection with someone who is a mother who is endearing to us, right? So it's which is a different term for a mother who is, it's almost like a mother who has status with you in a spiritual way. So kind of like mommy. Yeah, it is kind of like mommy. Yes, it is kind of like mommy. And I know people who do interchange Yeye with mommy a lot. And yes, and yeah, exactly. Like Big Mama, exactly. So EI is Big Mama. EI is Big Mama. And because, and particularly in this tradition, so for people who, like if your mother comes to your initiation, you have to salute her. Mofori Ballet, again, we go back to Mofori Ballet. Children can be taught to salute their parents, right? I think in some instances, it's probably a good idea for some kids to learn that, in my opinion. So when a child mofidibales their mother, they can say "ago yeye," or they can say "agbe mi yeye," and they will be addressing their mother if through a term of endearment, right? "Agbe mi yeye," and then your mother says, you know, "Olorun agbeo," or whatever they like to say. So that's. But when I salute my godmother, I always salute her as Iya, because she is big. But I always salute her as Iya, and because I've inherited that tradition, I pass that tradition on to my godchildren to, once they go through their processes, to call me Iya, right? And I don't know if I'll ever be Big Mama in y'all's mind, but you know, because that's a title that's earned, but that's the tradition we've inherited. But yeye really is more like a term of endearment for a mother, particularly a biological mother. It's really not a term, and some people like to use the term with me, even though I'm not their mother, and they just won't let it go. But that really is the difference, really, Fatumbi, is the difference between someone who is like given a term of endearment that is like mommy, and someone who is like your mother. And particularly for us, yes, you're welcome. Good question. Moving on to Egun, unless there are any other questions about those lines in the Mojuba. Everybody good? Okay. So can you guys see the screen? Okay. For some reason, I went out of presentation mode. I don't know why. So Mojuba Bogbo Egun. So I pay homage to all of my ancestors. So this is I say the larger, this is when you're addressing all of your ancestors. So and generally in this part of your Mojuba, you're acknowledging your both your, this is really a short Mojuba. This is not the longer one where you talk about you name all of your lineage, Iba Ilayentanu, Ararun, Egun Ori, or Iba Ilayentanu, where you acknowledge your lineage. So that's the much longer one. But with this one, it encompasses both your physical ancestors, those who your parents were born from, and who their folks were born from, and so on back until. So you're acknowledging those ancestors, which are not your spirits, which are not people who you admire and like a lot, or Marie Laveau. I've heard some folks say, I want to say Mojuba going to Marie Laveau. It's like, she's not your ancestor. She's a community ancestor. So we don't include community ancestors when we talk about Mojuba Bobo Egu necessarily. We really are talking about our bloodline and our spiritual bloodline. So once a person receives a leges or receives an Orisha, they inherit, as I mentioned before, the lineage of those who were initiated, whose ashe they inherited to receive a leges or an Orisha, right? So that is also, so we call the lineages one of blood and one of stone. Right, so the lineage of blood is your blood ancestors. The lineage of stone is your ancestors through your spiritual lineage. Okay. So if you hear that term, blood and stone, that's what's being referred to, is there's a lineage through the people who were initiated before you, whose ashe that you're inheriting, that is part of why you consider them your ancestors. Okay, so that's who when you're saying Mojuba Bogbo Egun, you're literally acknowledging all of those people in both of those types of lineages. Any questions about that line? That's pretty straightforward too, right? So Kinkamashe, I forgot to, I'm sorry, I didn't change the translation on the first Kinkamashe. So the Kinkamashes are a way to, there's a couple of things you can say, especially if you can say Kinkamashe when you're talking to your aunts, when you're talking to your Orisha, or if you're in prayer at someone's throne, whether it be my throne or someone else's throne, and you're saying Kinkamashe, you can, that's when you use that. So you say Kinkamashe, you can say Kinkamashe, and you can say like the Orisha name of the person who is your godparent. So for those who want to know, who want to use that, they can say Kinkamashe Oshumuyiwa, which is my initiated name, right? Or you can say Kinkamashe if you don't know or you don't remember the Orisha name, you can say Kinkamashe Iadidra. I say that too with certain people who's in initiated names, either I don't remember or I may acknowledge their Orisha name with the name that I associate with them. Like I'll say Kinkamashe Oshun Kemi Ia Liz, Kinkamashe Oshun Diwata Ia Barbara. Okay, so that may be a way that so you can say either way. You can say Kinkamashe Ia Orisha me. That in Ia Orisha basically means, like she said, my godmother or my godfather. Okay, so you can say Ia Orisha me or Baba Orisha me, or you can say Ia Didra or Oshumu Yiwa Ia Didra. Okay, or you can say Kinkamashe for Ajabona. Ajabona is your second godparent. So you can say Kinkamashe Ajubona Khan me. Ajubona Khan is basically that refers to the second godparent of a person who receives alekes, and in some cases when they receive Orisha. Okay, so and you can say their name, or you can say Ia Tiambe or Ia Ashabi, whomever their name happens to be. 1 second, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that.
Hey, Inya, can I ask a question? Sorry.
Sure.
And because I'm sorry, I'm not able to look at the screen. So if this is on the screen, my apologies. Is this done in a particular order?
Yes.
Okay.
So the first line is Mojiba Olorun, Mojiba Olufin, Mojiba Olodumare. So you start with God in the 3 primary ways we refer to God.
Oh no! I'm sorry. I meant the when you're saluting your lineage. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's a good question. So generally, yes, there is an order. So when you salute your lineage, if you're talking about the Mojiba Bogbo Egun Ararun, so the citizens of heaven, that's what that Ararun basically means, citizens of heaven. So you're acknowledging all of the ancestors who have departed and who are in your spiritual lineage. So I normally start with the founders in our trunk. So when you all hear me say Iba Eli Tenu, so if you do the big prayer, so this is a small prayer, right? So you say Mojiba Bogbo Egun, you don't have to say any of the lineage in terms of the order, right? You're covering them all with that brief Mojiba, because this is the brief one. Okay, there's one, y'all know, y'all probably heard me say the much longer one more often than anything else, right? So you hear me say the Ibae Layan Tenu Ararun. You've heard me say that, right? Ibae Layan Tenu Ararun Egun Ori. So when I say that, that's when I go into the lineage. So I start our lineage with who is considered in many ways the trunk of our family tree, spiritual tree. And that is Tata Gaintan and Sixta Gaintan. And I'll say her name twice. So those two founders are the ones who were responsible for bringing the Bata to Cuba and establishing Ilu Anya in Cuba and reestablishing the Orisha Anya to be consecrated in Cuba, and also bringing they were among the first Babalawos in Cuba. Tata Gaintan was among one of the first Babalawos in Cuba. So, so I acknowledge them first, and then I acknowledge Yeye Tolokun, which is the founder of Olokun in Cuba, in Oshabi. So those two women are also acknowledged amongst the first four that I normally mention when I do the Ibayes. So Ibaye means salute. So I salute my elders who are in heaven, who have descended to heaven, who are citizens of heaven, and then I go into that whole thing, right? So the bigger part of this prayer involves acknowledging that lineage, acknowledging the ancestors for both of all of my godparents' heads, because I actually have more than two godparents now because of some things, some additional initiations I'm about to go into at the end of this year. So I acknowledge the ancestors for the heads of my godparents. And that's separate from this because it's saying that they have ancestors that they were born from. I'm acknowledging their ancestors of their heads. So, which is different from me acknowledging the ancestors of my head, which is what I'm acknowledging when I say Moju Bobo Ego. So when you do the longer prayer, when you say Iba Elayentanu Ararun Egun, ancestors, Ori, head, you Ogongolo you, which is my godmother's Orisha name, I'm acknowledging the ancestors of her head and saluting them. So that's when in the longer prayer. So that's more where it's relevant, Andreas, is when you're doing the longer prayer and acknowledging the ancestors. So there is an order though, and that's the order I mentioned of those first. And then there are ancestors that everyone should acknowledge, whether they're directly descended from them or not, because they were so pivotal in everyone having a lineage, that those Orisha practitioners who are now deceased, we mentioned those, Adeshina, Efunche, and Apoto. Their lineages made it possible for every other lineage to exist in Cuba. And all of those that I mentioned in the Tata Gaintan, Sixta Gaintan, Yeye Tolokun, Oshabi, Adechina, Apoto, and Efunche, they are all descendants from Nigeria. They all came to Cuba from Nigeria. So when I acknowledge them, I acknowledge the land of their origin and their connection from that land of origin to Cuba. And so from there, I acknowledge the lineage back 4 or 5 generations in initiation before my godparents. So I acknowledge Oshun Kayode, I acknowledge Igbimbi, I acknowledge Oshunwe. I acknowledge Maya Domi, and I acknowledge Ordun. So acknowledging those folks, acknowledge all those who initiated people, who initiated other people, who initiated other people before then my godmother was initiated. And Odun initiated my godmother. So that's the lineage that I acknowledge when I do the Mojuba.
No, thank you for that. That's I was saying to Isai actually earlier in the week, I was like, I would love to have Ia talk about the lineage, the specific lineage, and actually the Mojuba. So it was serendipitous that you're talking about this tonight. So thank you for that. And also just one quick side note. I know you were talking to Kinka Mache, so I don't want to cut you off, but
oh no, I'm fine. I know the stuff from back and forth, so I'm not going to lose my spot.
Okay, but it's also just fascinating to me, just like just parallels between stuff. Because even in my like fraternal family, like that lineage, it's the same. It's a similar thing. It's like you acknowledge, like I have a father and then like a grandfather, and then just kind of, and so like we're a family. That's not across the whole fraternity, but that's across like certain chapters and certain families. So I have a whole family that I acknowledge that lineage as well. So it's just really, again, they're completely disconnected, but it's just interesting to me to kind of see these parallels between things.
Absolutely it is. I think so for sure. It definitely is. And I think that, and I've heard, I don't know much about those mysteries. I have some ancestors of my mother's father's people who were OES people way back in like the 1900s, like in the early 1900s. I just found this out. Some of my great grandmother, who I was raised with, some of her older siblings, she was a baby and a twin, and so she had like 16, 17 siblings, all from the same mother and father, who preceded her. And one of them, Coke Marie was her name. She was an OES founder in one of the oldest chapters in Texas. And I've always been curious about whether there was something along those lines in those practices as well. So that's interesting you mentioned that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something I got to learn more about my own lineage. I'm really curious to learn about what she did with that chapter, and it's one of those things I'm gonna do when my life gives me time and space to do it, is find out about her being in that world. She was an interesting lady. So yes, so that's the order and the lineage, and again, that's the longer one. That's the longer Mojuba, and we've gone over some of the lineage stuff before, but it's one of those things that because there's always more information to learn, it's always good to revisit that. So when we talk about Kinka Mache of our godparents, we're asking that no harm comes to them. And so it's a prayer that it's a part of the prayer for me that reminds me that, again, of my connection to someone else and how my destiny is tied to theirs, right? So when we pray that no harm comes to our godmother, our godfather, we are praying that, and to no one who's present, it's an interesting way to acknowledge how we are all connected, and that my godmother's health, my godfather's health, my Ajabona's health, their health is intimately tied to my health. So if something goes wrong with them, that means that something in my life, because because of my connection to them, that means that I'm praying for their protection, because their protection supports my protection, right? So that kinkamashe, when we say that and when we hear that, it means that we're asking the Orisha not only to support me. So even before I asked for my own prayer, because all of this is said before we can even pray for ourselves, right? So before we even pray for ourselves, we're going to pray for our elders. That's why I like to prefer that this is like the verbal Mofredi ballet. It's a way to acknowledge the people and the energies that support them, and that being inherent connection and support to us. And if we're in ceremony, we say Kinkamashe Oba. So if you're this is a ceremonial Oba, really, Mojiba, really, because if you're speaking to your Orisha if you're speaking to your Legba, you're speaking to your Ogun or something like that, you're not going to mention the Oba necessarily unless you're in a ceremony with them. So if you're in ceremony and you want to, acknowledge the Oba who is overseeing all of the ceremonies, you can pray for that person. And Kinkamashe Iworo is a way to ask that that if you're in ceremony and you're working with priests, that you're asking that all of the priests are well, because we don't want to, especially if you're in ceremony, because the last thing you want is for illness to be introduced into the ceremony, because illness in a ceremony means that something may be off, right? So we want to make sure that everyone's well, and if there's someone who's not well, that we make sure that we tend to them so that everything is good, because then that brings in other questions in the ceremony. So that's the general Kinkamashe. So after you say your major Mojuba, then you can go into, if you do this Mojuba, then you can go into, a prayer to, say, your ancestors, or a prayer to Alegba, or a prayer to Obatala, or whatever other Orisha that you want to pray to, or an ancestor that you want to pray to. So this can be useful to open up the way for those prayers to be heard. Okay. So I wanted to give you guys a chance. So I'm glad, because I was thinking, oh, I can put a couple of prayers to elect, but I'm glad I just kept it at this, because this was worth going through, more specifically, because like I said, I wanted to stretch this out to more than just one series, and talk about how we can use our prayer tools, right, to open up communication with the Orishas and support our inner alignment with them. So any questions or reflections or observations that you guys have for what we've talked about today? Oh, okay, see you. You're welcome, Isai.
I think for me, it brings context to everything. It's like I would get the rhythm of the prayer, and it was all recognizable, but now to know exactly what that all means and what each line means, it's like, oh, okay, now I can even bop a little bit more to it, because I have a little bit more of a connection to it.
Right, and that's part of another reason why I did this too, because I think one of the things always impresses upon me is, Shabi always impresses upon me, is that it's really important to know, to learn, for everyone to learn. And I think one of your ceremonies, she said, make sure they're learning what they're supposed to be doing, why they're doing what they're doing. Applying a critical consciousness to this is a part of it, so that you actually experience a practice. Without some critical consciousness, or some awareness at least, to what it is that you're doing, you cannot, I think, fully appreciate the practice itself, appreciate what it is that's supporting you as part of your practice. So this is a way to help to further buoy that. And, you know, I'll make sure during the next class that I'll, you know, bring the Mojibah back up and we can start to practice the Mojibah and then incorporate, you know, prayers to the Orisha and even talk about how Oriki can be used as prayer. Because when you know the Orikis of the praise songs of the Orisha, you can use them kind of like as a way to deepen your ability to connect with that energy. And you can also use them as a way to kind of deepen your connection with how they support you. So for instance, you know, there are certain prayers to Obatala that I like to say when people are working with Obatala, like if a pregnant woman is coming, you know, working with me to work with Obatala, I'll say certain prayers about how Obatala molds a child in the womb, right? What Obatala does in that process. And there's prayers that Oriki that literally prays Obatala that way. So applying that Oriki in that setting connects this person to Obatala in a very specific way to who they are and where they are in their lives. And so that deepens the connection to how Obatala supports and shows up for a person. So the more we study and learn Oriki and learn about, you know, wordplay in Oriki and how that comes, Oriki are very powerful tools, I think, because they can be a way to really paint a picture in prayer, during prayer, that connects us to the Orisha, that gives a sense of how, if we're talking about a river and we're praying to Oshun, what's the nature of a river? What happens in a river? What's in a river? How does a river, what is a river, what is the nature of a river, and how we can look at that as a question of how we talk to Oshun. If we talk to Ogun, what is it like to deal with hard work, or deal with building something, working through something, tenacity, you know, dealing with all types of things that deal with Ogun. So the more we learn praise songs, or the more we learn about the nature of an Orisha, the more we can apply that understanding in our prayers and connect that energy to make meaning of how we connect and work with that Orisha in our own lives. So I like to, you know, help everyone to see those connections so that you can deepen your practice and work with the Orisha. Okay.
I think I really appreciate this because I saw like Baba Willie on his was it Aleda website, Aleda
Yeah.
website. He had a kind of a summary of it, and then he kind of goes into, he had a summary of the Mojibah, and it kind of goes into like the lineage. And you know, it's like I know he's Baba Willie, but I don't, you know, I always want to triangulate sources, right? You know, like, okay, that's one source. Then I was reading in a little bit in Baba John Mason's book, and he kind of breaks a little bit down too. So it was just good to hear, like, oh, okay, what I'm reading actually is is legitimate. That's not to say they're not legitimate, but just saying that.
Yeah, but you see the consistency with how I'm explaining it and interpreting it, how they would explain it and interpret.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I really, and then the other thing that I know, this is tough, but I'm a visual learner. And so, and I know this isn't necessarily a visual tradition in terms of the knowledge being passed down, but as you know, I know it's auditory and oral, you know. But I'm trying to, and I'll talk to you about it too more, but I'm even just trying to, like, I appreciate you talking about the trunk of the family tree. Like, I'm really trying to understand where people are their lineage and my place in that lineage or potential place in that lineage. And so I don't necessarily, I'm not asking for an org chart or if one exists, but I'm trying to make one myself in my head, because for me, that's how I reinforce what I'm hearing. Like and so even having this slide today was really important for me to actually see the words, see how they're pronounced, right? Even though I'm hearing it, but then also kind of see it and hear how it's being pronounced. So I definitely appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so me and another priest are working on something that I think can respond to what you're asking for. We've had so many initiations this year, we haven't been able to pick it back up. But yeah, assigned she and I to kind of do some of that digging and to kind of codify all of that documentation. She and I both, when we were in Cuba and here, and she actually has done more digging in Cuba than I have. And interviewing and all of that stuff and getting information and putting it, in context and actually building a picture of all of it. She's done some work that I haven't done. I had some knowledge that she didn't have, so we actually worked together pretty well. So we're working on something that I think can respond to your question.
It's great to hear.
Mm-hmm. And she's really phenomenal. She's a great researcher. And has a real good knack of where to kind of look at that stuff pretty well. So it's good to work with her. So this is where we're gonna start with the prayers sessions. Like I said, I want to start with this foundation, build on it, and give you all more information and hear more from you and incorporate things so you all can make good use of this. And I want to say hi to Anwulika. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm learning a lot. I feel like every time I come, I'm like, oh, I really need to make sure I come every week so I cannot miss anything.
I think you picked a good week to come.
Yeah, this is great.
Mm-hmm. Good. So I know you had some troubles with logging on initially. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We have a few minutes left.
Well, I have one question, but it's it's unrelated-ish. I tried to go to Haji to schedule an appointment with you, and there was nothing. And I was like, is it just all booked or?
No, there's some, okay, and you're not the only person. I've had literally almost half a dozen people in this past week alone, ask me about this. I'm not sure what's going on. And I've reached out to Aya about it, and I'm not sure how she's resolving it. I don't know if she's having some difficulty with resolving it. But meanwhile, you can just reach out to me directly and we'll just work on it from there.
Okay.
I do have some availability this Sunday, so you can just text me and we can you have my number, right?
I do. I'll text you right after this.
Okay, yeah, we can take care of it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right. Yes, so with that, I am complete with what I have for you all today. Like I said, I wanted to keep it, very kind of more of a not a million slides, but a more deeper dive. I'm really liking the direction this is going in, and I'm looking forward to how much more we can do. And I like to get more into pronunciation next time. So when we, we'll work on that together so you can start to hear yourself say the words. And because this is, starting it with the ceremonial one, that's not the deeper one, gives you a chance to kind of get the basics down. so you don't take on a whole, I know some of you feel like, I just want the whole thing, but you don't really need the whole thing right now. You just need to start here, and then we can work our way to the more detailed one. Because I think it'll be good to just start with this, work on this, give this some space in your mouth and your mind. And like Katie was talking about the rhythm of it, there is a rhythm to the Mojibwa. There's definitely a rhythm to the Mojibwa. And we can work from here, and I think you guys will do well. It's not going to be any quiz or anything. I promise. I'm not going to quiz you.
Can I talk to you afterwards, Ia?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, you got some things. I have some questions for you and Andres, actually. See where you guys are at.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So we'll talk. All right. So you guys, this has been wonderful once again. I always say, I always learn as much from you as you feel from me. I love when you guys talk about how you're thinking and feeling about things I ask you questions about, because it broadens my thinking about it too. So thank you for your for asking questions and being connected to this process. I appreciate that. Yes, take care too. Have a good
Thank you.
weekend.
You too.
All right.
Have a
All
good
right.
weekend, everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Bye, little one. I forgot your name.
Oh, wow. Trying to end it, y'all. Sorry.
She's such a spirited little one. Actually, can you two stay on with Andreas and
Yeah,
and
I was gonna ask Roz if it was private or not. So
okay.
But Tumbe's still there.
Yeah, I think he's still there. Oh, I don't know if he's still working. Oh, yeah.
yeah, he's probably still at work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably still at work. I'm gonna put him in the waiting room. All right. So okay. So where are you guys at with